All right, so there's a restaurant in Toronto called VELA, and they have a $600 Van Winkle 10 Manhattan on their cocktail menu. It's called the Gold Room, and it's part of their reality check section of their cocktail menu. It also includes other famous places in cinema history with inspired cocktails from those movies. They have a Mos Eisley from Star Wars. Classic Moe's Tavern uses a lot 40 rye. Sounds super interesting. Leaky Cauldron, that would be from Harry Potter. And the Gold Room, the 1990 classic The Shining, the Stanley Hotel in Colorado, which opened, I think, in the early 1900s. Obviously, the Gold Room is the classic scene where you see Jack Nicholson talking to the ghost bartender. So the first three cocktails, very moderately priced, but how do we get to a $600 Manhattan? Well, if you're not familiar with the bourbon market, Van Winkle, Pappy bourbons, some of the most collectible in the entire world. This bottle would retail for something like $69.99, secondary market price well over $800 US. You might even see it for higher amounts at certain shops. I used air quotes when I said Pappy. A lot of people like to call the Van Winkle line Pappy Van Winkle. It's not. They come out with a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old. Those are just Van Winkle. The Pappy line is 3 bottles at 15, 20, and 23 years of age. That word Pappy definitely has a connotation to it, so a lot of people will refer to these bottles as Pappy 10 or the 12-year-old being Pappy 12, but they're not. They're Van Winkle. A bourbon made by Buffalo Trace and selected by the Van Winkle family. They definitely use the best bourbons in the warehouse for these. This uses the wheat mash bill, meaning that the second grain next to corn is wheat. The specifics of the exact mash bill are unknown, but it is rumored to be about 15% wheat in this mash bill. So the Old Rip 10, bottled at 107 proof, 53.5% ABV. I personally get notes of like vanilla, caramel, roasted marshmallows, really nice sweet cherry, a little bit of oak, and like a really nice like nuttiness kind of profile to this. It's a very good bourbon, of course, and excellent value at retail price at about $70 US. Is it worth paying the secondary market value for this? Obviously not. But you know what? I had a little heel of this left, so why not kind of recreate this cocktail? See how it is. So not much information on the menu, just saying that it uses Old Rip 10 and Absinthe Vermouth. Absinthe Vermouth is a Spanish vermouth that is a sherry wine base. I did reach out to the restaurant to ask what went into the cocktail. They did not want to divulge that information, which is not uncommon. A lot of places won't tell you every ingredient that goes in. They just told me that it was a spin on a classic Manhattan. So reading in between the lines, they call it the Gold Room. So the very famous bar in the Stanley Hotel, that hotel constructed in the early 1900s. The Manhattan cocktail itself originated in the late 1800s, so you're talking relatively within the same time frame. And the first mention of the Manhattan cocktail was in a really old cocktail book from 1891 called The Flowing Bowl. So if this restaurant is using, the Gold Room as their inspiration, and it was during the same time frame as that Manhattan cocktail, so I'm going to construct one using that original recipe, and I'm going to use a vermouth similar to the one the restaurant used in their cocktail. So the Absinthe vermouth that the restaurant uses, not available in this area currently. This is a really good vermouth. This one is La Copa, made by Gonzalez Baez. I hope I'm saying that right. It is a Spanish vermouth that is a PX and Oloroso base, so very, very similar to the Absinthe vermouth. The recipe also calls for a dash of absinthe. Absinthe, really cool to add to cocktails. This is Hill's Absinthe. It's from the Czech Republic. It is 100% wormwood distilled. This one obviously more for cocktails, which I actually think will work better here. This is not like an authentic tasting absinthe. This one is definitely more generated for cocktail use. It's got added sugar, obviously added coloring as well. It's coming in at 70% ABV. Really nice notes of rich mint and pine, and just a little bit of that like anise, black licorice kind of note. This is definitely more like balanced, mild, than like a really like hardcore absinthe you get from France. But I think it's going to actually work perfect in this cocktail, whereas one of those other ones probably wouldn't. So this is a great choice. Rounding out the ingredients in the cocktail, we got our gum syrup. This is essentially just simple syrup that's a little more thick, adds a little more viscosity, sweetness to the cocktail. The bitters, Angostura, obviously. This is a go-to bitter. It's been around forever. they don't really make many better bitters than this. I think if you look at top cocktail places in the world, they're still using Angostura unless they're making them themselves. Cool little note about the label. When this was made, I think it was two brothers. One ordered the bottle size, one ordered the label size. They didn't match. Obviously the label sticks out. They just went with it, and that's kind of been their signature trademark since then. All right, so let's make this thing. I got my cocktail glass here. It's got a nice gold rim on it. I think I'm staying on brand with the gold room theme. First step, if you don't want to chill your glass in the freezer, you don't want to have a glass in the freezer, you can just put a couple ice cubes with a little bit of cold water in that, let that thing chill up. Got my mixing glass, got my ice. All right, so the recipe calls for 2 out of the 3 parts to be whiskey and 1 out of the 3 parts to be vermouth. Classic is, 2 ounces whiskey, 1 ounce vermouth. I'm only gonna use a ½ ounce of vermouth in this. I think when you're paying this much money for a cocktail and the focus is this really highly allocated, extremely expensive on the secondary market bourbon, you want to taste the bourbon. I think that cutting the vermouth in half will really kind of elevate the amount of flavor you get from the bourbon. All right, so here we go. 2 ounces of Old Rip 10-year-old. I'm putting all the ingredients in before I put the ice in, therefore everything will just chill at the same rate of time, instead of certain elements chilling a little bit quicker than maybe others. I don't know if that matters that much, but it just has a more controlled dilution when you put the ice in after. All right, so ½ ounce vermouth. So the recipe calls for just 1 dash of absinthe. I'm just gonna use a bar spoon. This is about I'll use a little bit less than a bar spoon. It's about approximately 3 to 5 milliliters. The gum syrup, same thing, bar spoon of that. And a couple dashes of bitters. I like to use maybe, it says 2, I like to use about 5. All right, add the ice. Pro tip, when putting ice in a tray like this, use filtered water. Definitely makes the cocktail taste better because you're looking for about 30% dilution in volume from water. So you definitely want to use good water. And stir. It's kind of like rule of thumb of how long you want to stir for, how long you want to dilute for. I think anywhere between 45 seconds to a minute gives the ice cubes enough time to dilute. When you're using a spirit-forward cocktail like this, having a good amount of dilution is key to keep everything balanced with the cocktail. Okay, when it's nice and stirred up, pour it into your chilled glass. Garnish. The recipe calls for a maraschino and cherry. The Luxardo, some of the best cherries you can get for sure. Super, super rich, super, super good. These are the best cherries I've tried for sure. There you have it. You're gonna see a little bit of the cherry juice just slowly drip into the cocktail. It's gonna add another just super nice layer of sweetness to it. And there you have it. A recreation of an overpriced whiskey cocktail, $600. Let's see how it is. Cheers. It is actually phenomenal. It is really, really good. So super aromatic. Get really nice dried fruit flavors, red fruit, like cranberry, so maybe a little bit of strawberry in there. That vermouth, definitely adding the ½ ounce was key. You get a lot of the bourbon, really nice vanilla, caramel, that burnt marshmallow note, the sweetness with the bitterness of the vermouth and the bitters, super, super well balanced. This is really good. This came out awesome. There's like this bubblegum sweetness on the tail end of it. That cherry was really good. Maybe just like a touch of that anise, the absinthe making itself known just very, very slightly. It's hard to really tell. If I didn't know there was absinthe in it, I might not even pick it out, but just a little bit. That black licorice too. So that bubblegum sweetness, the oak from the bourbon, man. So I am really liking this cocktail. This is good. Is it the bourbon that's making the difference? Maybe. I mean, it is a really good bourbon. Would other bourbons suffice and make a great cocktail? Yes, they absolutely do. I mean, obviously, the poor man's version of this, you could go to something like a Weller 107, same mash bill, exact same proof. You're just getting a different barrel selection for that, but that would be an easy replacement for this bottle. Even those are becoming hard to find at retail. Secondary market on those is a little bit high as well. There's other wheated bourbons out there you can get as well. I'm not the biggest fan of Maker's Mark, but Maker's Mark is one. But you can make like any bourbon or rye, I think mostly is what this cocktail typically goes for. I think rye whiskeys would work really, really well with this because you get an extra layer of spiciness as well. I've made this cocktail before with Sazerac rye. Really, really good. That works well. If you want to look for a Canadian rye, Lot 40 is really, really nice. But any rye whiskey or bourbon that you enjoy is going to make a good cocktail. These ingredients, not that hard to find. But if you are a liker of the Manhattan, this version of it is delicious. So, would I be happy if I paid $600 for this? I mean, it is a great cocktail. Of course it is. It is a great bourbon, but absolutely not. There's no point in paying $600 for this. What kind of clientele is looking to get a cocktail for this? Some hot shot out with their friends and wants to order something crazy on the menu. I'm sure it happens, but there is just as good quality of bourbon out there as this one, and without the secondary market price tag for sure. So there you have it. Let me know in the comments down below. Are you a Manhattan drinker? And if so, what's your recipe? What little twist do you maybe add to it to make it stand out, make it unique? Love to hear that in the comments down below. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I'm gonna go enjoy this. Cheers.